Hey guys, this is Mark. In this lecture, we will explore the topic of database integration because let's face it, whenever you start building web or mobile application, you'll be running into the question of how do I integrate with the database? How do I bring the data from the database into the UI and then sending it back and so on. But in this application, in this example, we will keep it rather simple and straightforward, where we will simply be grabbing data from a database and populating it in the UI, which is a fairly straightforward task, and it is fundamental to understand how that flow actually works. So I thought that creating this example and putting this lecture at the top of the course would be fairly important just to get a feel, get the taste of the actual flow of working with the database, and some of the concepts that we have already explored, such as data binding, will come into play and become quite helpful here as well. So let's just jump right into UI Builder and get the database integration going. So now we are in UI Builder. However, since we are working with the database, and when you create an application, the database is empty. So the very first thing that we will need to do before we do anything in UI Builder is actually populate the database with some data. To do that, you would need to switch to the backend section by clicking this button right here. And in there, click the Manage button and then click Import. And the reason we're doing import is because I put together a sample database that you would need to import into your application. It is a very straightforward task. All you will need to do is to just browse to a file and import it into your application. Backendless will do the rest. It will create data tables with all the data that you will be able to use in your UI application. You will find a link to that file that you need to download to your computer in the description for this video. So simply go to that link, the file will be downloaded, and then you will need to click the Browse button right here for under Import Application for the Backendless App section. Click the Browse button, select that file, and open it up in here in the browser. You will see the UI will look exactly as I have it here on the screen. Then click the Import button. Backendless will start importing all the data, and you will have it in your database. You will receive an email when it's done. It will roughly take about maybe 10-20 seconds. Once the data is there, and you can actually see it there in the database by clicking the data icon right here. The data tables you will see are city, country, and country language. I have some other data tables that you could just ignore. They're not related to this video at all. Just some other data tables that I have from other things. But anyway, the most important one is going to be the city for this specific lecture. So these are just some major cities in the world. There's roughly 2,000 of them, specifically 2,408 cities. So once you have it in there, that's perfect. That's what we will need. You can see the structure of this data table by clicking the Schema tab. And notice that the names of the columns are going to be name, location, district, country, population. The ones that we will need to use for this particular lecture are going to be name and country. And the country points to another table, which is the table country. To see it from the data structure perspective, if you take any given city, then there is going to be a relationship to a country that city is in. And you can just find your city. More than likely it is going to be in there. So for example, if we take Buenos Aires and we go to the relation for the country, click on that relation, and it opens up the country, and as you can see, it is Argentina, because Buenos Aires is in Argentina, and that's the relationship there. So now that you understand the structure of the database, let's go back to UI Builder and start creating the UI that will populate data from the city table in the UI. The use case that I will be exploring is very straightforward. All I want to do is to display a list of the cities and possibly display a list of the countries that those cities are in. The very first thing is going to be just to display the list of cities. To do this, I will drag the container object right into the UI. And for this container object, first of all, I want to make it more compact vertically. So select the actual container, go into dimension, And then for the minimum height, just remove it so it is auto. Do the same thing for the row. Click on the row and go into the dimensions. Remove the minimum height. And then repeat the same thing for the cell. So as you can see, it became a lot more compact. By the way, we are using the container component. The structure of the container component is it contains a row, one or more rows. By default, we include one row in there, and that row includes one cell, and then row may contain multiple cells. So out of the box, it contains the minimal structure that the container always has. This cell, we will drag the text component right into the cell right here, and this text component will display our cities. So here for the text, select text and go into the events, and we will need to configure the data binding. So the content logic for that city will use data binding for the property name. If you ask me why name, well, this is because this is the name of the property that contains the name of the city. And let me show you what I mean by that. Let's switch back to the backend and go to the city table. Notice that in the city table we have a column called name, and it contains just the name of the cities. So when we're binding to name, we're actually binding to this property in the city table. And when I say this, you really are binding to the property in the city table, but technically speaking, we're binding to the property in the data model. And the data model for an individual row right here is going to be a specific city object. Let me show you how we get to that specific city object. So let's select container. So now we see container is selected. And for the container, we want to enable dynamic list behavior. Dynamic list behavior is one of those cool things that is inside of UI Builder. And when you select dynamic list behavior, you're telling UI Builder, hey, UI Builder, I'm going to use this container in a special way. I will provide to you a collection of objects. In our case, we will be providing a collection of city objects. And I want you, Mr. Container, take every single object and for every single one of them, replicate this row vertically. Just start rendering a row for every single city. And then this every new row will be representing that city object. And now any component that we have in that row can be bound. We can use data binding for the properties of those individual city objects. Now this should make sense whenever I select text and go to the data binding properties. See, the data binding to name is going to be a data binding to the name property of the individual city. So now that this is configured, let's select the page and go to the events for the page. And the event that we're interested in is the on-page enter event. And in here, whenever, by the way, this event is going to be triggered every time the page is being loaded and constructed. So in here, what we are going to do is use a block in the dynamic list category. Notice there is one that is called set dynamic list items to container one. By the way, it would be better just to give it a name to the container. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. So select the container. And let's call that container cities. Cities container. And let's return to the events for the page. So now we see we have the set dynamic list items to cities container. By the way, whenever you have a container enabled as the dynamic list container, remember in the container we selected this dynamic list behavior. So whenever you have this dynamic list behavior selected, then in the codeless logic, in the dynamic list, you will get these two blocks. If you don't have any containers configured for dynamic list behavior, these blocks are not going to be there. So these blocks are sensitive to the fact that you actually have a container with that dynamic list behavior. Anyway, so you use this dynamic list, set dynamic list items too. So what are these items going to be? Well, they are going to be actual objects that are coming from the database. So how do we bring objects from the database? Well, for this, under backendless, if you go to data API, you will see this block that is called load table objects. Connect it to items and specify the name of the table where the data is being loaded from. The name of the table is city. The page size, the maximum is 100, so we can bring 100 objects at a time. And this will simply bring all the objects from all first 100 objects from the table city and assign them as the items for the city's container. Okay, let's take a look what it looks like now. So as you can see, these are the cities that are coming back from the database. So we already are making progress, but let's just modify our query where the data that is coming back from the database is ordered, because this block, as you can see, it has a lot of different input parameters, and one of them is going to be sort by. And sort by will take text, where here we can sort it by the name, which means that database will return all the cities ordered by name. Let's take a look what kind of change this will result in. So as you can see now, the cities are actually ordered by name. So this is good. Let's make it a little bit more complex, and in addition to the cities, we also will display countries that city. So in addition to the city name, we'll also display the country that city is in. Let's go back to the user interface and let's add another cell to our row. So here is the cell, and add text to that cell. Let's select the cell and modify the dimension so it is not taking that much vertical space. So this text will display the name of the country. Now, name of the country is going a little bit more challenging because the country is really a separate object than the city. What's going to happen is when we retrieve collection of cities, we will modify our query so every single city also contains the actual country object that it belongs in. Let's make this change first. Right here. Notice that one of the input parameters is called relations. And then for the relations, we will add a list because you can request multiple relations, but in our case, there is only one. So this relations input will contain a list of just one property. And that property is going to be country. So why is it country? Let me show it to you. Go to backend. Notice that there is a relation called country, and that relation is to the country table right here. So in our block, when we specified country there, we're actually telling the backend, Mr. Backend, in addition to all the cities, for every single city, return the country object that city is in. So these relations are going to be populated with actual objects. That's what I'm talking about, is we're basically specifying return country for every single city. Now, when we render that row, we already take care of this one. This is going to be the name of the city. This is going to be the name of the country. The name of the country, in order to populate it and display in this text label, let's go to logic. And then in the content logic, at this point, we cannot use data binding, because data binding, in this case, we could reference only properties that belong to the actual city. But now we need to reference a property that belongs to a country that belongs to a city. In this case, we need to add logic to resolve the content of the country. Click Add Logic. And in here, row 1 data is the actual city. So if we do this, get property, and put country in here, this will return the country object. And then if we do this thing, this will return the name from the object that is the country. I hope this makes sense, because this may not be super straightforward, or may be straightforward, but it is important to understand that row 1 data in our case represents the city object, and then we retrieve the country related object from that city, and then from that country object we get the name. And that's how the content logic for our country label will be resolved. If we run it now, as you can see, we have the ordered cities, and for every single city, we have the country that that city is in. What if we want to sort that list by countries instead of cities? So right here in the sort by, rather than putting name, which references the column or the property in the city table, what we can do is we can put country.name. And in this case, it's basically telling the backend, return a list of cities and sort these cities by the name of the country that that city belongs to. Let's see what that looks like. And as you can see now, we have an ordered list of countries, and then for every single country, we get the cities that are in that country. So as you can see, working with the database is actually very straightforward. You do need to understand how to map the database structure to the actual mechanism of referencing columns and properties and relationships in the UI logic. Once you get this, it's going to be a breeze. And I hope this video makes it easier for you to understand how it works. We will be exploring it further in depth, but I wanted to demonstrate how this works right from the get-go, because this is very important to see that it can be actually very simple, but will require some additional knowledge to understand how that mapping works. Thank you for watching this video. I do hope that you found it useful. And as always, happy codeless coding.